you are aware of Robin's work. He's done some remarkable books. He's collaborated with John Michel on The Measure of Albion. He's made major breakthroughs in the understanding of the geometry, metrology, and the mysteries of Stonehenge, publishing many books on the subject, including one of the classic wooden books that's published by John Martineau. And more recently, we interviewed Robin for our Megalithomania YouTube channel. There's a link in the chat where you can actually kind of get access to that. We did an hour-long interview in response to the Stonehenge Lost Circle Revealed documentary, because Robin's been living there for a very long time. He's been researching the landscape. He approached it. He sees many things that, the archaeological world and the academic world don't so much take on board. Although we did hear from Mike Parker Pearson last night, actually mentioning the fact that one of their guys actually uses the measurements provided by John Michel, which really surprised me. So I think that this kind of thing is starting to be revealed. But today we've got Robin sharing his latest research. Well, we'll get the lecture started, Robin. Just want to welcome you and thank you for joining us. So we'll start the lecture and be prepared at the end and to take a few questions. So we'll see you on the other side.
Roll 'em, you. Hello, I'm Robin Heath, and this lecture is for Megalithomania 2021. What I wanted to do most of all with this lecture was to break free from the COVID restrictions and go up in the Preselles. And this opportunity was made very, very clear to me when I watched the documentary about the Waun Mawn site on BBC One in February the 12th. So off we went, my wife and I, armed to the teeth with theodolites and various bits of measuring kit, and also with a keen eye for observing what was going on the ground there. This lecture is what we found, and I hope you find it interesting, because this shows what happens when you come above ground. You leave the archaeological domain and you look at the relationship between the sky and the land, which the above and the below. So this landscape that we're talking about in the Preselles is particularly heartening to me because it still looks megalithic. It's hard to believe that we're in the 21st century. Of course, the modern world encroaches on it, but this is a wilderness area with a wide variety of megalithic monuments. Many of them are some of the oldest megalithic monuments we have. If you want to understand a megalithic landscape, I believe you must focus on the liminal space, that's the boundary between sky and landscape. That's where all the megaliths are. They're not under the ground, they're on the ground. And I want to really stress that the above and the below meet at the point where Neolithic folk would have sited their temples and other monuments. As they didn't have balloons or aircraft or submarines, they couldn't have sited them anywhere else, could they? So the techniques required here are quite different from those presently employed by archaeologists. The Waun Mawn stone is quite the weightiest stone of the Waun Mawn collection. Incidentally, for those of you who don't speak Welsh, it's Waun Mawn, but they tend to pronounce Maen Waun quite a lot, and you hear it pronounced lots of other ways. Welsh vowels are an acquired taste. The stone is located along the gated farm track to Gurnos Farm on the right, and it's a little over 1,000 feet from the remains of the stone circle. And the stone circle on this slide is to the left of this big stone that looks like a dragon's head coming out of the ground, and it's to the left of the stone, and it's about 1,000 feet away, 1,100 feet away. In Welsh, the stone is known as, has also been known as the dragon's head, which is Pentre, or the monk or druid of Waun Mawn, Mynachyd Waun Mawn. That's just for those of you who want to get it right or understand the meaning. Part of the site, an almost inconsequential part it would appear, are these two leaning stones which are on the left-hand side of the track and about 400 metres from the gate. And they are leaning in parallel, they're coordinated, flying in formation stones, and they don't seem to have much to do except lean forward, but at the same angle and the same shape. They look, if you like bent or partly knocked over tombstones out of a graveyard. But there they are, and they won't be there much longer. the ground underneath is being eroded because sheep shelter there in the winter months, which is most of the year these days, and the stones are visibly leaning more than they were when I first visited this site in 1990. Well, now we come to the crunch of the documentary, which was the discovery of, or the investigation into what could be gleaned from these 4 stones, the sole remaining stones from the claimed Bluestone circle. And the arc that they represent from this slide makes it obvious it's worth investigating to see if one could fit a circular perimeter, circumference around from these stones. So my work began with a fundamental measurement which doesn't involve complicated technology at all. It involves a long rope that doesn't stretch, and I find the central position from the position of the 4 stones as they are now. We'll be talking about them in a moment, but primarily that long rope has to fit through the middle of all of them, and we'll see how that progresses now. How can that size of the circle be determined is probably, without bias, can only be done with a rope that isn't a tape measure and being taken, and by trial and error you find the best match to fit all these 4 stones. To give an idea about the scale of the stones at the stone circle, the big Waun Mawn stone, the one we've just covered, Pendragon, is about a human being plus a half. I'm using the standard measure of a wife here, and the one next to it on the right hand slide is showing the only upright stone of the Waun Mawn collection, and you can see that it's very nearly the height of a British standard wife, and that's a pretty good guide for anyone who wants to know the sizes here. The hill in the background is Vreni Fawr, which is the figurehead of a ship, really. It's in Welsh, that's what it means, and it's the sort of mountain that introduces you to the Preseli Ridge as you come in from the west, from the east towards the west. So the survey tasks identified are we've got to find out if those 4 stones are indeed located such that they lie on the circumference of a circle. The second task we've got to do is to then identify the centre, radius, diameter and circumference of that circle. And we have some possible problems we must consider, and I presume they were considered by the archaeology team. All 4 stones have to be placed along a narrow arc for it to be a reasonable assumption that it made a circle. 2 of the stones now lie recumbent. Basically, they've fallen over. Which end was buried and which end once rose aloft is a very pertinent question. And I'll do my best to let you know how I think they should have been once when they were standing high and proud. The third problem is perhaps a little bit more serious, and it does need consideration. As over a third of all stone circles are not actually circles at all, they're different geometric shapes, how might anyone know if this example was once circular or not? Well, the answer is very difficult, because quite a few circles are flattened circles where the radius changes as we go around the rim of the circle, or the rim of the ring as it becomes. Quite a few of them are ellipses, which means that they need 2 focuses. There are 2 centres, and we won't go into the geometry of that now, but the point is that again the radius is changing. And the third example are the type 1, type 2 egg-shaped designs. They're standard geometries. They're a family that are found from Brittany right up to the Shetlands. These particular non-circular rings are found. But if this is one of them, then what we're about to describe might not work. And because I'm not an archaeologist, I have no idea what the archaeologists discovered underground here and trying to find extra stones. And they don't say it wasn't a circle. They're very clear that it was a 360-foot diameter circle, 110 meters they also quote. But it is a fundamental problem with all the research that follows. So if we get right down to business here, the sort of equipment that we need to investigate this circle is placed, well, most of it's placed on the stone there, the recumbent stone of stone 1. It's a GPS device. It's very useful, not essential, but very useful. A sound recorder, so that you don't have to write down while you're walking and you can just basically speak into it. 200 foot of high quality rope, a 100 foot tape measure or two, a notebook, a stave, which you can see me holding there, an ordnance survey map, 1 to 25,000 Pathfinder or similar, and then one Megalithomania, an example of which is seen standing behind the stone there. Now, big question, which way did this stone fall? It looks, from the angle of the photograph, as though this stone should stand with its right-hand end in the earth. It looks like a pointed, slender stone, but this is rather deceptive because, as we'll see, we'll try lifting it on that end, which will be very interesting for some people because that wasn't shown on the TV programme. We're a bit ahead of the game there. There we are. So was this stone originally this way up, which is a very elegant stone, looks fine to me, that could be the situation, or that way up, and suddenly a woman who's knee-deep up to the bog there in the PT bog seems to be doing something with a laptop or a iPad. This way up, the stone looks just as happy, and we'll find out what will happen as we go on as to which one of those we choose. Stone 2 is the only original standing stone. It is prime data, and it also, luckily, has a very small footprint compared to a bigger stone, and because it's upright, it does have that's where we think it was there originally. It was the original position, and it's part of something else, and we'll find out that later, what that something else was later in the lecture. Now here's stone 3, which we are lucky enough to see evidence of a stone hole on the left-hand side of it, on the side where the shadow is of the photographer, probably me, and the stave to give you some example of the size of it. So we think that was raised on the left-hand side. I haven't got a fancy graphical picture of it like that because I think we know where that stone fell. This is a rough rectilinear stump, that's technically the term for it really, presumed to be in its original position. If you give it a thump with a mallet, or a soft mallet, a wooden mallet, it bowses very well. You can hear the dull thud of a stone that's much bigger. It's not just a slate or a flat piece of stone that's been laid there. So I think this is the stump of a stone that's gone, and therefore its cross-sectional area is very similar to stone 2. Now I'm not going to talk about the geology of any of these stones. That's something that I'm not qualified to do. So we'll carry on and we'll have a look now at how this work can continue in order to find the centre. For the first circle, this is the model that assumed that stone 1, that's the left-hand stone here on the slide, was lifted towards the centre of the circle from its far extremity. The first model that we investigated, the first arc we tried to match, was with that stone being in that position. So if we assume that stone 1 was originally raised on its present southern end, then we got this size, the centre was found. And then we could move on to the next model, which was assuming that stone was flipped onto its northern end, which is furthest away from the one shown on the screen now. Let's have a look at that. Now we've got the second circle that was, we think, of all of the ones we tried, that was the best fit. The two of them that we settled on with that stone. This one is the best for fitting all 4 stones, and we used a rope of unmarked length and a technique of basically successive approximation, walking backwards and forwards. And one of the problems on a bog like this one is that it's covered in gorse, and it's the most nasty thing to try and get a rope round across through, and so you keep getting snagged up. It's a bit like fishing in a very, very weedy canal. You lose a lot of patience very quickly. But we don't want to predetermine the length, so we've done two examples that are the best fit to all four stones. The first example gave an answer of 126 feet, and the second one gave an answer of 141.8 feet. So we find ourselves with this rope stretched from a guessed centre, one that we've estimated to be more or less right. We've done some quick sweeps and that seems to be we're in the right area, but we don't know. But we then get this thin rope which paid dividends for us because it wasn't as heavy as a normal rope, and it didn't snag up in the gorse as much as we could flip it over patches of gorse quite easily. But anyway, it has to be said, it was arduous. To find the centre was a hard job. And so it was a technique of successive approximation, trial and error, and eventually we determined the circle's centre. I drew a chalk line then onto the stone with a final pass over the stone to show where in the cross-sectional area of the stone's base it would have passed over the stone. I haven't access to the two recumbent stones. I can't put my fist through the stone, so I've basically written the chalk line over the top of where they would have been. That would have been. No measurements have yet been taken, and the best fit centre has to be established without any bias and no a priori knowledge of how big it is going to be. And then when you get the centre, make sure it's marked really well so you can A, find it again, and B, you can attach a rope to it such that it won't shift the centre, so it won't pull whatever you hammer into the ground out again. And from then on, it's just plain mathematics to find the circumference and the diameter. Once you've got the radius, diameter is twice that, the circumference is the diameter times pi. The first slide here on the left is tensioning the rope. This is the procedure, rope running, and you fasten it firmly to the ground, walk to the stones and find the best fit. And then secondly, the slide to the right, not labouring the point I hope, you measure it with a tape measure. I use 100-foot tape measures because they're more portable, and I have surveyor's chains which are very heavy and you wouldn't bring them up here normally. But this tape measure is 100 foot. The centre lies more than 100 foot away, and luckily I've got two tape measures and I've chained them together so that they run consecutively. The next slide shows that process of hammering a chisel in the ground, and the tape has been drawn from, in this case, stone 2 and the position on stone 2, and we get a length of 100 foot plus 41 feet 9.6 or 7 inches, and that's the length, the radius of 141.8 feet. And here, if you follow the starry trail of doom here, you can see where the rope end passed, coming back from the centre, walking around the arc of the stones. This is the stone 1, the one that we stick up, the bit you're seeing now that looks like a snake's head, replete with an eye socket, would have been stuck into the ground such that the arc of the circle would have passed through the point marked by the stars. Stone 2 passes right near the end of this stone, and you can see that sheer vertical edge, which is almost like dressed stone. It's almost been polished dead smooth. That's quite a noticeable feature of this stone, and this particular stone 2, with the method 2 we use, the centre we guessed as 2, was more or less where the red stars are. With the first stone circle, the stars would have fallen just outside on the right hand side of this line, and that's why I think that the method 2, the stone circle we found last, was the better of the two, better fit. Stone 3, we know where it was placed in the ground at the left hand end there, and that's the position of the stone circle, or the perimeter of it. The perimeter of any stone circle would have passed through more or less where the stars are. And stone 4, much the same, it passes through the middle of the stone, and everybody's happy and we're sleeping in our beds again. Now we can move to the model proposed by the archaeological team, led by Mike Parker Pearson. It's a 100-foot stone diameter. That was emphasised in all the press coverage I saw, 110 metres. And if this is a reality, if the stone circle that they found is to be taken as a reality, then Pembrokeshire hosts the largest stone circle in Britain. Except that one of the non-circular stone circles, Long Meg near Penrith up in the north of just near Carlisle there, has a diameter of 359 feet, and such are the stones that define that average diameter. It goes easily above 360, but as I say, not all of it is that diameter. It's a flattened stone circle. Now let's look at how this fits from using Google Earth, a 180-foot circle centre. We can see that it passes very nicely through stone 2, just inboard of stone 3, which implies a flattening of the arc, and then it misses stone 1 altogether. Now, before any of you conspiracy theorists in the audience want to start griping about that, and it's obvious and archaeologists don't tell the truth and all of that, which doesn't belong with us anymore, I'm afraid that's had its day really, we need to be starting to look at the fact that the archaeologists had an advantage over megalithic scientists or lunatic fringe people like me, because they could dig the earth, and they're qualified to know what they're digging. They found stone holes which might well have meant a compromise had to be made between the stone holes that they found and the existing arc of the stones that I've been working with. Now, I don't know anything about that. All I know is that 360 foot diameter stone circle, it's got a real whopper, but it's also the ditch, the bottom of the ditch at Stonehenge's diameter, and I suspect that was the reason they chose 360 foot, or maybe that influenced the decision. But I don't know, and therefore they must pursue their methodology just as I've pursued mine. If we compare the two circles, you can see clearly the difference. The flattened arc of the white circle, that's the archaeological one, and then the blue circumference is the line that I consider to be the best fit. And you can see the two centres there in the middle of the arrangement, and you can see how close they are. They're not far off. There's a 40-foot difference. Okay, so let's summarise. The 4 stones, as far as I was concerned, were the only visible above ground evidence, and I didn't have evidence from below ground. The best fit from the evidence was either the 125.5 foot radius or the 141.8 radius, and we assuming that they're circles, and this depended on which end of stone 1 was originally raised. The larger 141.8 foot, 141.8 foot circle has strong links to Stonehenge. We'll find that kicking in the second half of the lecture. These putative circles were found using an unmarked rope to ascertain the radius, walking back and forth many times to and from the stones prior to using a tape measure to measure the radius. And all of this is geometrical evidence placed on the table for anyone to pick through now. Meteorological and astronomical evidence can now follow on from this summary, and that will lead us to interesting places and strange things. We have one other question to consider, and that's how many stones doth a circle make? So stone spacing and number of stones is quite an important feature of a stone circle. And to do that, you need to measure the distance between stones, and I've only got 4 stones and possibly 5 spaces, therefore, to evaluate. The distance between the first stone 1 and stone 2, is quite large, and we must assume that 2 are missing in between. There's 2 gaps there, and so 2 more stones and 3 gaps between them, and the total is 5 gaps. So you add up the total space between S1 and S4, stone 1 and stone 4, and you get 166.72 feet. Divide by 5, which is the number of stones that you can see, and you get 33.34 feet as the spacing. The next thing is to find how many stones there were in the circle, and to do that you need to know the circumference and divide it by the spacing. So the archaeological circle, well, 180 feet, has 1131 feet circumference, and divide that by 33.34 feet, the spacing, the average spacing, and you get 33.92 stones, which we could say would be, as it's very hard to put 0.92 of a stone in a stone circle, you'd have to say 34 stones. For the stone circle that I evaluated with my wife, which is 891 feet, the answer is very close to 27 stones. It's 891 divided by 33.34, and it gives us 26.72 or 27 stones. That's quite a big difference between the number of stones. But of course, it makes the assumption that the spacing was even and regular, that it didn't pack in more stones around parts of the circle than others. And so we move on now to having a look at a different aspect. We altogether can now rest with the circles and which is the best and which isn't, and go back to what's on the ground. The big Waun Mawn stone, the one that was not really mentioned on the documentary, is well connected, and it's not only connected to other stones on the site, but also forms a key component part of a much larger geometric pattern that of course wasn't mentioned on the programme. This brings it into contact with Pentre Ifan, which is unarguably the logo of Pembrokeshire National Park and the region generally. It features on most of the brochures, and it's one of the must-see chambered tombs, or Siambr Gladdi in Welsh, that looks very much like some of the Irish tombs, but it has some quirks about it which we'll investigate later. So this big stone there is standing there really on its own in the middle of the moorland there, going nowhere, doing nothing, until you start to look at what it actually is doing and which other sites it's talking to, because it is doing a geometrical conversation with other sites in the region. And in 2007 and then up to about 2009, I surveyed and found out what that was all about. In the meantime, let's look at a site that we've just looked at earlier, these two twin stones, or the two gravestones that are leaning, and their relationship to the Waun Mawn stone. Put yourself behind these two stones and look at the middle of the gap. It's pointing straight at Waun Mawn Big Stone. That's quite an interesting arrangement, and I've made it into a triangle, even though there's nothing there. It's just to show where you're positioned. And we have similar things in Cornwall. The two pipers at the hurlers points at the cheese ring in much the same manner. The gap points at the cheese ring. But here we got Waun Mawn. If you get down on your knees and become recumbent, so to speak, you can then see just the top of the stone above the head, top of the horizon there, where the arrow ends, marking the stone. There's an inset showing the stone, and you can see there that they're very popular with hawks and buzzards. So often the stone has a whitewash on the top from the dung of the animal. So that's just the connecting Waun Mawn to some of the big stone to some of the other site stones of the whole complex there. But this is what Waun Mawn represents when you do a survey of the other sites it touches. It defines the corners of two equilateral triangles. That's triangles with 60-degree angles on all the corners, and in standard surveying that's used for chaining a distance across the landscape. You can measure just one side and replicate it to make this arrangement and move it just very easily across the landscape to define a survey. It was used for map making and still probably is. Two of the sites here are natural features that include megalithic sites. Carningley and Nevern Castle could be considered as natural features that include megalithic sites. The sites at the Nevern Castle is the moot of, it's called the Very Special Works by archaeologist Cathcart King some years back. He called it the Very Special Work. It's the only Welsh castle with two mottes, two big mounds based within the curtilage of the castle site. Well, Waun Mawn is directly south of Nevern Castle, and Pentre Ifan or a burial chamber near the summit of Pentre Ifan, is exactly east of Carningley. So we can actually see all of this arrangement in the diagram. At Waun, which marks the centre of this curve, right near a spring, there's a 4-foot-high bluestone megalith at the central point. And I want to make the point for matters that might have nothing to do with archaeology, but have a lot to do perhaps with anthropology or with the local history of this area. And it is an important point that the central site was the principal birthplace of the 1970s self-sufficiency movement and the New Age movement in Wales generally. There's a list of names that you will have heard of that have lived within 50 or 100 metres of that spot. Satish Kumar, whose job was education and leading of the movement, was setting up a self-sufficient school here and then moving it to Devon. There's John Seymour, who wrote the big book on practical self-sufficiency. There was Robin Williamson of the Electric String Band, and more recently at nearby Brithty Mawr community, Emma Orbach has been providing programme material for Ben Fogle on the television. You may have seen some or all of these programmes. So right in the centre of this shape, and we don't know why, the whole self-sufficiency movement in Wales and then in Britain started to happen in the 60s and became a big deal and remains important. Let's have a look at another diagram now. The tricky stuff. This is the stuff that makes it uncomfortable to say this is a load of rubbish. Because it isn't. Because basically this cross is lined to the 4 cardinal points of the compass. That's the first tricky bit. And to do that, there has to be a knowledge of astronomy. You can't put an east-west line or a north-west line down without knowing how to do that with astronomy. Secondly, the cardinal points are telling you something. I mean, they're still the north, south, east, west that we have today. They're telling you something about some intelligence involved in the siting of these monuments, which is never considered. We could say, why are you measuring in feet? And I would have to answer, I measure in feet because basically I'm able to do so. People aged a bit younger than me don't really know an inch from a foot, from a yard, from a furlong. The old measures have disappeared, and the metre is a very modern. It can't possibly be anything like the measurements being used in megalithic times, one thinks. There is a foot, often found in a type of foot, called the Russian foot, which is 7/6 of an English foot. I'll come back to that, but we notice here that the circumference of this circle, of the inner circle, the one marked on the slide there, with the white sort of fuzzy shading to fill it in, is exactly 7.00 miles in length. Now that's a ripe old one, because that implies that not only feet but miles might have been used by whoever built this structure or planned this structure. Can that be true? And what 7.00 miles is suspicious. But then if we use the Russian feet and dismantle totally the whole business of the English foot and replace it with one 7/6 as big, the circumference in Russian miles, as we might call them, becomes 6.00 miles. And that would fit far more the hexagonal structure of this nature of an equilateral triangle, because 6 of them make a hexagon. It's nice, and it's nice geometry. And then we've got Plato's recommended choice for the diameter of a circular temple, which on this basis here, the circular diameter is 10,080 Russian feet, which is nice. And we've got there a Neolithic temple, pre-3500 BC. Pentre Ifan wasn't conceived until that time. And we don't know about Waun Mawn or Nevern Castle. And we do know there was a Neolithic burial chamber near the top of Carningley. So I can't propose anything else than you're looking at a Neolithic temple site. It's very big. And then if you actually complete the vesica with the two circles that hold the triangle in place and create the almond shape of the vesica, then we find a 2x1 rectangle being created from the tops and bottoms of the circle, equal to the width of the crossbar on the middle of the two triangles. Now the vesica piscis is a very ancient geometrical symbol of generation and of the creation of new life, for fairly obvious anatomical reasons. In Italy it's called the mandorla, and we could just refer to the circle as being a very important geometric construction. And for those who are interested in the maths and the geometry, it leads to the production from a single length, a unit length, of all the irrational square root numbers, the root 3, root 2, root 5, and so on. And this has been something that has cropped up with several researchers I've had conversations with and visits with, particularly in Brittany. The double square, the triple square, and the multiple squares is very, shall we say, rampant, certainly found quite commonly. And you can find the double square in the Lake District commonly, and you can find it in Scotland quite a bit. I'm not qualified to talk about anywhere else, but the double square definitely features in the megalithic mine set and is found at quite a few sites, not on a big scale necessarily, but sometimes on an enormous scale. So I just want to show this final slide, which shows a double square, and it shows how if you construct it here and make the first unit, the remen, which is we commonly thought of as an Egyptian measure, it's 6/5 as a Greek or the geographical feet. The length in English feet is a very awkward 1.216512 English feet. But from that remen stems other units which are commonly found in megalithic and ancient monuments. The royal cubit is the diagonal of one of the squares. The megalithic yard of 2.72 feet is the double diagonal across the double square. And if you rotate the royal cubit, the end of the royal cubit length with a dotted line, where it meets the megalithic yard, it cuts the megalithic yard into a royal cubit and a foot, which makes a very interesting equation, which is that the megalithic yard is minus the royal cubit equals the foot. That's something to think about. All these lengths here are commensurate with the polar circumference of the Earth. Discuss. So I want to change the subject now. We don't want this lecture to be too mathematical or too geometrical or too metrological. What we want to do is to have a positive role or a purpose in where we're going. And this next slide shows that purpose. We have a site just down the road from Waun Mawn, about 2 miles away, in the middle of a very boggy place where people die and horses die with their riders, and so you do need to watch what you're going into, and you certainly don't go there in wet weather. And the site is shown on the left-hand side of the slide here, and it looks more like a rib cage of the Welsh name for Bedavank is the grave of the monster, or beaver in some Welsh dictionaries. So if it's a beaver, then Welsh people were very much smaller in those days, I would imagine. But it looks like the rib cage of some prehistoric monster, and it's not in very good condition, one would guess. If it was a passage grave, then you'd have to be very small indeed and crawl on your stomach to get in there. We don't know what was on the top of it, but the point is we do know where it is, and we do know its position. From there, if you look on the horizon, you can see the sun rising in a natural dip caused by Vrenivauer and a plateau in between it, and then Voeldrigan, the conical hill on the right. And that's where the sun rises at the equinox. And the right-hand slide shows a point some distance from Bedavank where there is a set of aligned stones pointing at the equinox position of the sun, which rises about 1 solar diameter just to the left of what I've shown there. Now I've introduced that because equinoctial sun rising is something that hasn't changed since megalithic times. The angle hasn't changed. We get 2 equinoxes a year, dividing the year roughly into 2, and we can say quite categorically that whilst alignments for sunrises and sunsets have changed since 3500 BC, the extreme solstice positions and the major and minor moon rises and sets have all changed by nearly a degree because of the Earth's tilt changing very slowly, or the obliquity of the ecliptic as it's known to posh people. Now the obliquity of the ecliptic is now the angle that we have for our Earth's tilt of 23.47 degrees. But in 3500 BC, that angle had gone up to over 24 degrees. So it's more than half a degree. And that reflects in an angular inaccuracy or fuzziness around these old alignments. They don't work as well as they should. And therefore you have to have the maths, which is formidable for many people. You have to have the maths to be able to convert what you've seen at the solstice and measured into how it would have looked in ancient times. We don't need to get bogged down in that, but it is a problem. But at the equinox, the Earth is always in the same position with respect to the ecliptic, and the sun always rises dead in the east on a level horizon and sets dead in the west on a level horizon. That's nice. So these sites are valuable because you know that you're watching what would have been seen. If it was indeed an alignment, it's in the right position. So up the hill here at Waun Mawn, 2 miles up the road, there's a more advanced equinox detector, and it has extra features, and these are really exciting. And this is where archaeoastronomy comes into its own. But only when you add the geometry and the metrology does it really give you a picture of what was going on in the heads of the people that built this monument. That thing on the top of the stone there is a theodolite pointing in the opposite direction. It'll become clear. I don't look through that direction to make the mountain look further away. We've been using it both ways, and I'll explain that later. So we look at the azimuth angle and the elevation angle. The theodolite gives us that straight with a sun shoot and a few. You can find the position, the absolute, to a couple of minutes of degree on that theodolite. So that's what you're going to see around the time of the spring equinox, which was lucky because we were doing the work around that time. So every morning the sun rises further to the north, and the north is over to the left here and south is to the right. So you can see as we get near this equinox on the 21st, the sun is more or less skimming over the top of Voil Dragan, and it's rising more or less where it says the word horizon, because refraction makes it rise on a much flatter angle, and it comes round a corner. And so we've set that up to show you, and I've done the best I can with the photographs I've got, but you can see there that the stone 2 is where you would watch that. This allows you to do a number of interesting things. Once you have got a solar observatory, you can count the number of days in the year. You can tally them. And there's examples in the Preselles of stones covered in tally marks, really deep ones, and that may be what they were used for. You can record the number of elapsed years, and if you do that, you will discover eventually a 33-year repeat solar cycle. There is 1 year where the sun rises further to the right or further to the left, depending on which equinox we're talking about, than any of the other years. And if you can do that, you can get the calendar more accurate than the one we use now. But in the case of this particular example showing it now, you could quite easily come here and in 4-5 years you could get the calendar accuracy that we presently have with our calendar, which is 365.25 days in a year, which is 1461 you would tally in 4 years, when the quarter days accrues to be 1 whole day, or very nearly. Now, if you've not seen that technique before, you might need to just give it a bit of thought, but let's move on. If we turn that theodolite over on its face now and we point it in the other direction, and I come round the other side of the stone, then the last flash of the autumn equinox, and we did get it on the autumn equinox, The weather just gave us a sunset. We see the sun setting over the stone there, and at that point, and only at that point, can we say that that's the position of the last flash on this raised horizon. And the interesting thing is that you can just see sticking out on the right hand side of the top of the stone a much darker lump, tiny lump, which is the end of stone 1. It's just discernible on the right hand side of the level top of stone 2. So I think this confirms that it was stood up on that point that it originally, because then the last flash of the sun would crash into the stone, and that would be your equinox timer. That's your precision instrument from which you could time and tally the length of the year. I think that perhaps stone 1 should be re-erected to resume the function. What do you think? Is that destruction of a site, or is that just restoring it to its original condition? If it was a vintage car, we'd have no doubt what anyone would think. We'd say restore it, wouldn't we? But no, we leave all this stuff often, in a bad way, and we shouldn't do that really. I think we should change our attitude and get these things working. This is a wonder of the world, and it's there on site, and it's not being properly looked after. And now for something completely different. Rather than a rant from me, Pentre Ifan. That's our monument, and it's not as modern visitors get to see it. No, not many people take a photograph of Pentre Ifan looking like that. And I want to make some comments about it before we move on. First of all, it's directly east of Carningley, this site, the Vesica site. And the other point is that it's on a very, very steep slope for a dolmen, or a dolmen type capstone. If you look at it, it's nowhere near level. The capstone is pointing downhill at quite a hell of an angle, and it's as though it would shoot off like supercar and hit the valley bottom directly below. And that is a very interesting feature, and I don't know of another dolmen that's built on such an angle. And when you look at the number of square millimeters that great big stone at the top, which might be 20 tons, is sitting on, it amounts to little more than a few square inches of cover, and it's surprising it hasn't slid off. One day it might, and then I wouldn't want to live down in the valley below. Tobogganing, anybody? Right, secret back garden. Having been moaning about it being on a slope and how unusual it is, listen to this now. Directly above it, in fields that are on private land, is a totally flat area, and it's very large. It has a wonderful view. You can see Carningley there, which is directly west of Pentre Ifan. We've got the British Standard Wife as a unit of measurement to compare. It's much better than having a stave, I think. And I want you to point your view at that big stone, that really big stone. That is a slab. It may even be an outcrop. I can't imagine anyone ever moving that. It's vast. And the rest of them are littered about the field, and they don't look like they're doing anything. But they are doing a lot, and we need to see what that is. Here's the big stone, the slab, looking like a tortoise's head coming out of the ground, and it's got its little earth-fast dolmen alongside it. It's a sort of executive dolmen, sort of place a posh Neolithic person would have to park the donkey or whatever, or the aurak. And here we have underneath there the triangular pattern in the field, which you can see on the inset photograph. Number 1's the one to watch. We'll be coming back to him in a minute. But there's the big slab is number 2, and number 3 is a stone well over to my right as the photographer. Right, so we look at this from above, and we start to find some very interesting things out. The first thing we find out is that the leaning stone there is on a line back to Waun Mawn from Pentre Ifan. It's not totally exact, but it's exact enough to be exciting. And this is the line from Waun Mawn to a pointed stone here, and the square stone is embedded in the field, and only the top of it shows, but it is absolutely a right angle. We'll see all this in a minute. This stone here has a flat edge, and then it allows passage to a pointed stone here, and we've no other proof of it being a double square, but you'll see in a minute that things are not necessarily disappointing because of that. The field has probably been cleared of smaller stones. I've drawn in yellow how a double square would look once it was laid out. There's the pointed stone there, and these are all the same length, and they go, the top one there goes to the stone with the right angle in it, and the middle one goes to the center line of the double square, and then coming towards me we've got another square, or not. But there's the flat edge cornerstone and the square profile cornerstone, and you can see quite clearly that they are set up. And then interestingly, the angle of this, well, we'll come to that, but the angle of this square is of interest to us. So at that point we can draw the 45-degree diagonal, and we can see it at the other side of the slab there. And then finally, if we carry on working with this, we can get excited about the fact that the length, 66 foot seems to be the length of the side lengths, and we can see looking over to where there's nothing. There's no stone there. There's a stone in the hedge there, and there's a couple of big stones here that we don't know why they've been piled into the hedge. And then there's a sheep there, which isn't a stone, and these stones could have come from there. We just will never know. But there's no doubt that that stone is a right angle stone, and there's no doubt that the one on the other side is, and the lengths are the same length. And then we have this sloping stone, the leaning stone of Pentre Ifan that no one knows about. For those of you who are interested in animals, and like David Attenborough, there's Genghis the sheep that's about to ravage that woman in the blue cardigan. It claims lots of victims every year, and she's not looking, she's more interested in the monument. But what I really think we should be interested in is the angle of that stone. The angle of slope of that megalith is just a tad over 26 degrees from the vertical. And what does that mean? Well, only geometers know about this sort of thing, but it's the angle of a double square. It's one of the angles of the triangle of a double square. And we put it together with a line from Waun Mawn to the slab. Well, we've found a parallel, haven't we? And I was a bit amazed at that. We've got the length of the line from Google Earth. I didn't go with my tape measure for 4 weeks without food and drink to establish it. I'm happy with the accuracy of that length. And there's the angle of tilt of the stone, and they are parallel. But I wanted to check that this was the angle, so I built a jig, a piece of equipment that allowed me to ensure that that was what the angle was. So I made a triangle, a double square triangle, one half of a double square, and that angle gets made automatically, the stone, as you can see here, and you can see that it closely follows that angle. And I made sure there was a spirit level to mark the level at the top, and a plumb bob, which you can see with the wire, which is parallel to the vertical piece of wood. I'm holding it there against the side of the rock, and sure enough, that is the angle of a double square. No messing. And the plumb bob and the spirit level are an affirmation that this is not some sort of fantasy. And this sort of kit is useful to build. It doesn't take long, and I already had all the equipment to do it. Pentre Ifan, you can see there as the woman's been ravished by now. She's had it. She's dead meat. The sheep's had her. So there was no chance of survivors. So there we have what's going on at Pentre Ifan. But we also know that this line here and the line to the sunrise are realities of what's been going on at Waun Mawn, and they are the same geometry as half a double square. The triangle is half the double square. We can complete that. We've got the center of the circle down here on the inset of the photograph on the left, down at the bottom there. We've got a stone just to the left of the slab there. We've got the Waun Mawn stone there, but that's not what this is about. We're looking at Voeldrigan here. And then we can flip that together and we see the angles of a double square. That should excite anybody, because it's hard to imagine how this could be other than a consecutive set of clues that lead to a conclusion. And the conclusion is that this was intentional. The angles all fit. We've got the dimensions of the one side marked on this slide, and we can go on forward now and have a look at a bit more about this, because now it's going to get silly. For those of you who don't like megalithic science or think it's all bunkum, you might like to go and have a break now or have a cup of tea. Turn away now if you don't want to know the final score. Okay, we're now looking at these lengths, and we can suddenly find something rather remarkable. That the length of the Waun Mawn to Pentre Ifan line is 10,786 feet, all but, and that equals the product of the solar year, the actual astronomical year, and the lunar month, the lunation cycle of the moon's phases. Multiply those two numbers at the bottom of the screen together, and you're going to get that number, and that number in feet happens to be that dimension between Waun Mawn and the slab. That in itself should give you enough to either make you joyful and sing your way home, or make you gnash your teeth with grief that I can be so deluded. Let's have another look. Strange sums from a vanished epoch. We're combining lengths, physical lengths, and attaching to them a meaning of days in this case. So we're saying that feet, 1 foot equals 1 day. And that's quite a thing. A foot equals a day. And then when we look at the side going off to Voeldrigan, we find 10,867, it's times root 5 of this number, the 10,786, times root 5, which is 2.23 roughly, you get 24,118 feet, which is the year times the month times root 5. Which means, if you separate it out, that the lunar month times root 5 is 66 days all but. Now, I didn't know that, and I don't think anyone else did. But the lunar month times root 5 is 66 days. And that's 2 solar repeat cycles of 33 years each, if we take it as being a day for a year. And that might seem obtuse, but we keep finding 66 as feet in that double square set on the level playing fields of Pentre Ifan's back garden. And we also find 33 years as the solar repeat cycle. And we know history's full of solar heroes, and they're all connected to the number 33. And in our own epoch, it's the crucifixion and the resurrection of Christ took place when he was 33 years old. But there's scores of Irish heroes, folk heroes, that all had something to do with the year 33, and it's there. And of course the solar hero is not these people necessarily, it goes back much further. And it goes back to the fact that the real solar heroes were the very guys who were building these stone circles. And it's a sort of folk memory. Here is an interesting track we can take. We now look at the gravestones, the leaning stones of Waun Mawn, the 2 stones that are little stones that I pointed out in an earlier slide, and we find that the distance from them to the Waun Mawn stone, the big one, that seemed to be doing nothing and just being an isolated stone on a lump of moorland, have some connection, and the connection is one we've already seen. The distance from these twin stones, the centre line of the twin stones, to Waun Mawn is 891 feet. The Waun Mawn stone is 891 feet away. Now the circumference of the Waun Mawn circle is identical. Furthermore, the mean circumference of the Aubrey circle at Stonehenge is identical. And this isn't where it all finishes, because we've seen that the Waun Mawn stone, the big one, is connected to double square activity in forming the what I call the Preseli Vesica up to Nevern Castle, Carlingley and Pentre Ifan. But the plot thickens because 891 feet is 327.6 megalithic yards. And 327 and a little bit more, 8.86, is 12 sidereal lunar months. And therefore we can say that this dimension of 891 feet, to within 99.9%, equals or represents 12 sidereal lunar months. And this is very much what the Aubrey Circle at Stonehenge has been suggested was for. It it had 56 holes in it, but each time that you do a revolution round it, it represents the lunar sidereal month as the moon moves around the zodiac during each sidereal month of 27.32166 days. And the number of stones in the Waun Mawn circle we suggested was 27 stones. So there is starting to be a numerical resonance going on here between three things. This linear line up from these twin stones to the Waun Mawn stone, 891 feet. The circumference of the Waun Mawn circle is 891 feet. The mean circumference of the Aubrey circle is 891 feet. It's a mantra. And of course it's connected to the sidereal lunar month in quite a positive way, and it connects the foot to the megalithic yard, just as we found in that diagram of the double square and the measurements that were generated by within the double square. Here we had the foot and the megalithic yard juxtapositioned in that double square. So this is an exciting slide to put up on the board. If we look at Waun Mawn and the connections between them, we can show this in another way. We can show that the Aubrey circle and the Waun Mawn circle, in terms of their dimensions, are identical. And this was found not through measurement, but it was found because that was the best arc that could be drawn through the circle, 4 stones, the arc of 4 stones, when the stone 1 was lifted at its northern end. So we've got 3 examples of 891 feet, and we've seen that the sarsen stone outer diameter has a circumference of 327.57 feet. This means that the dimensions of the sarsen circle is a scale model of the Aubrey circle at a ratio 1 foot equals 1 megalithic yard. And that being the case, the ratio between these two circles is 7/19, very closely 7/19, but as a fraction it's 0.368. And here we see the sun and the moon cycles integrated, because the lunation, the monthly full moon, there are 12.368 of those in a year, which is neither 12 nor 13, it's this number 12.368. And so we get an integration between the sarsen circle and the Aubrey circle. This is really interesting because, if nothing else, Stonehenge appears to be a representation of the sun and the moon. In this slide, I want to change the subject a little bit and look to the nature of the 33-year cycle. If we want to understand the length of the solar year, one way to do that, in fact the only way to do it in a Stone Age culture, is to observe and tally the sun's motion and setting points and find a tally before they repeat against the horizon. Now the site that I'm looking at now are 2 mountains. They're spaced apart as we move further outward. The right-hand peak is much nearer to us than the left-hand one. But this is a set of sunsets that I photographed in the early part of the millennium that we're in now, photographing the sun as it set. And most years during that period, that decade, February the 18th was kind to us, and we got a last flash sunset. But you'll notice that every year, from the first 2 slides here, the little section of 4, that the sun every year moves a little bit to the left. The last flash moves up the hill of the right hand peak. It sets in the egg cup later on in 2004, and then it moves back. By 2006 we couldn't get 2005 because the weather's bad, because we live in Wales and that time of year is not particularly brilliant for weather, and often the horizon is obscured. But if we look at this, after 4 years the sun repeats its pattern, and therefore we can say that from that, if you count the number of days and tally the number of days, you get 3 years of 365 days, and then suddenly there's an extra day in the count, 366. If you add all those up, 3 lots of 365 and 1 lot of 366, it gives you 1461 days. The tally is 1461. And of course, if you divide that by 4, you get the average length of the year, which is then 365.25 days. So far from being primitive, this tally method gives you as accurate a calendar, or a length of the solar year, as our present calendar, which was invented by Romans and a chap called Sausages around AD 45. So the site makes it possible to record the superannual cycle of the sun after 33 years, when you get an extreme last flash position. Now, I've never known whether this is measurable or not, but if it were measurable, we would attach a very great importance to that as a time period. And 33 years, and the number 33 is allocated to solar heroes. The Irish ones, the year, the age of Jesus when he was crucified, and then the resurrection occurred after 33 years. And the number 33 is connected with solar heroes. And so one thing you might like to consider is that the whole concept of the solar hero is based not perhaps on these fairly more recent heroes, but on the people who built the stone circles and were doing the sun and moon monitoring. They were the solar heroes and the lunar heroes of their period, because they sorted out the calendar and they understood the repetitive or cyclical nature of cycles of the sun and moon on planet Earth. So now I want to consider, before we finish, that where we're going with this. For years now, the archaeological profession has issued the sort of stuff that I'm presenting here, and has even been rather deprecating, shall we say, about the nature of the people that undertake this sort of work. It has not been happy to accept into its fold astronomy in the form of archaeoastronomy, and it's not been happy to accept metrology, because metrology has been rejected by the Western world for a long time now. Ancient metrology has not been acceptable, or has been seen as a poor relation of the other sciences. And yet what we've been looking at here during my lecture is the history of the science of measurement and the history of the science of astronomy. And to some extent you're seeing the basis of geometry. And those three subjects, astronomy, geometry and metrology, are the very nature of megalithic science. Now I think that the archaeological evidence that is being produced now, using various new techniques for accurate dating and the age of rocks and how long a stone's been in the earth, and these sorts of techniques, and analysing teeth for isotopic and element composition, identity of where the teeth were brought up, where the person who had those teeth, did those teeth in ancient times come from Switzerland, as the archer at Stonehenge, and the archer at Stonehenge, and all of that. That sort of work is absolutely vital to improving our understanding of prehistory. But what we can't do, is, it would appear, is to shunt this stuff together and work together such that progress can be made. And progress desperately needs to be made in understanding prehistory. It needs to be made in order that we can answer John Michell's big gripe in his book, where he says the problem with conventional archaeology is that despite centuries of diligent work, they have been not able, archaeologists have not been able, to put together an answer to the simple question that everyone wants answering: what were the stone circles for, and the megaliths for, and why were they built? The two questions are linked, but until we can be more definite about answering those, then we've failed in our duty to explain prehistory. And so I'd like to say thank you for listening to me, your virtual company, and I hope that you've enjoyed my lecture and it's given you food for thought. And I'll say ta-ta for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks so much. Really appreciate that. Wonderful lecture. So Robin's going to just join us to answer a couple of questions before we have a break, and a few announcements in the break as well. And then we're going to head into the speakers panel. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first question we've got from Deacon Mail. I'm not sure what the person's name is. Wonderful work, Robin. Have you ever read Uriel's Machine by Knight and Lomas? Very much in line with your material.
The answer has to be yes, and it's a big story. But briefly, I shared an office for 2 years with Bob Lomas when I worked for Ferranti designing microliths. So in one career, I've gone from microliths to megaliths. I call that career progression. I don't know what Bob's doing now, but I think he's retired. But it's an interesting book. And the stuff on Enoch was very relevant to my own work. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very, very useful book. That yeah, we've got a question from Andy from Megalithic Portal, Andy Burnham. Hello, Robin. Brian John has highlighted the other likely megalithic sites in the vicinity of Waun Mawn or Waun Mawn, you can pronounce it properly, and the general stone scatter in the area as well. His point is that Waun Mawn may not be as unique and special as it is made out to be. What do you make of this?
Well, get him along to lecture to you next year and put his case forward. I mean, it's a free world. I know Brian quite well. He's perfectly capable of putting an argument forward. And he has a science degree, so he should be able to do it. I'm getting some questions coming on, individual questions coming separately, which I got confused there. But yeah, come on, Brian, let's hear what you've got to say.
Yeah, I'll read them all out, so don't worry, that's fine. Okay. And we've got Ali Cooper. Do you think people in the Neolithic and Bronze Age realized the moon goes around the sun and the earth around the sun, etc.?
I can't answer that because I would have to have some evidence of it. But if you live near the sea, it's fairly obvious from watching a ship go over the horizon that there is a curve. And from that, you end up with looking down a well at Syene and calculating the diameter of the Earth years after the megalithic, Neolithic period. And again, it's another question that cannot be answered, but the numbers suggest that the lengths of the year, the solar year and the lunar month were well known, as was the 18.6 year cycle of the moon's oscillation up and down in the sky and its extreme major and minor points. I think that's the best answer I can give.
Okay, Scott. And I've got another one here from Matthew Smith. Says, Robin, it's quite a long one. I live in Sweden. I visited lots of the stone ships around Scandinavia. They have a Vesica piscis design. And you had one on your diagram as well. And it made him think about the shape, the almond. I'm suddenly interested to check out their alignments and positioning. And there's a 30-foot tumulus called Anund's Hog. The main ship there is two of the almond shapes on top of each other with a central altar. Have you seen any of these cases where one is on top of the other?
No.
Okay. Okay. There's a long question, short answer. That's one way of doing it. Okay, so the next question we've got here from Abby Sue. We have megalithic builders to thank for our calendar and concept of time. I would be interested to hear how the Romans developed their calendar. Have you got a take on that, Robin?
Well, they got this guy, I think he was a Greek guy, to redesign the calendar, because the problem was that there were so many calendars operating in Europe that messengers were getting to sites where the date was before they were sent out. And so there was a massive problem with dating, because there were several types of calendar running. The main ones were the 8-year, the later Jewish calendar, which was based on the 8-year cycle, 99 lunations. And then there's evidence for a 3-year calendar, which we can find evidence. There's some evidence at Avebury for that, but where in 3 years there are 37 lunations, but it's not very accurate. There's one at 5 years, which is the Coligny calendar in Gaul, which is, again, not too accurate. And then you get this thumping great accurate one after 19 years, which is the Metonic cycle, which is the one that was used by this Greek chap. So there's 235 lunar months in 19 years. It's a very, very, very accurate one, that one. And I think that once the Romans had that, then they could standardize the calendar throughout their world domination empire.
We've got a question from Ross Broadstock, one of our speakers here. Wonderful work, Robin. Can you say a little bit more about the tally marks, please?
Yeah, there are several examples in the Preselles. I've not much experience of anywhere else, not for lack of looking, but in the Preselles there's a site called Carn Enoch, the main road from Dinas Cross to Bessie's pub in near Pont Vine. It's on the right-hand side as you go out of Dinas Cross, up to the top of the Preselles, and it's a lump of a big, massive outcrop, a volcanic outcrop. And in that, there's first two things about that. If you take a compass up to the top of it and climb it, there's a 1 foot or 2 foot distance in the compass's movement. It will go from reading north to reading south to reading north to reading south, which is good fun. Now, Carn Enoch, not Caer Enoch, Carn Enoch is also, as you come down it on the eastern side flank of it, there's a massive stone covered with up to 2 inches deep notches spaced evenly on, and there's all sorts of other things going on there. Which probably I can't go into in any detail, but the answer is that's the site to go to look at. And if you email me, Ross, I can send you a photograph of that stone.
Okay, brilliant. I think questions. Yeah, I think that's all the questions. I've got a question, please. When's your next book coming out?
Well, it was coming out quite soon, but I had a 27-inch Mac computer that blew up irreparably. Luckily, I've got the chapters and all that, and it needs setting out in InDesign and all that. But I need a publisher. I'm too old to be doing all this. I'm doing the research. I'm fed up with doing everything. And so I've decided that that's it then. But I've said that before, as you remind me every time we meet.
And the book is, because you're going to be coming to Megalithomania next year. We've already talked about that physically. Hopefully we'll do it live in Glastonbury, and I think that's going to be on your birthday as well, to be honest with you. But
it always is. It always is, but it doesn't matter. As you get older, you find that actually fewer and fewer people are interested in your birthday. It's a fact.
We've got a couple more questions actually just popped up.
23 I am.
So excellent. Me too.
Had a hard life. Yeah.
Well, A. Williams asks, this is a practical question, is the field above Pentre Ifan open to the public?
No, it's not. And the farmer, you sit down with a Welsh farmer and eventually you get to the point where you have your second cup of tea or something. And that discussion is yet to be had. But he is very keen on knowing what goes on his land. And there's some big megaliths further back along the line, which I can't get to at the moment because the lambs are in, they're all there and you don't want to go in and spoil them. So I'm working on it. It was a really nice farmer. And I said to him, well, why is this field not available? Why didn't someone make that part of the Pentre Ifan thing? And he said, well, they came here in the 90s, he said, and I won't mention the organization, but they came here in the 90s and basically they took most of the stones on the site near Pentre Ifan away as clutter. Okay. And so what you go in to see now is actually the top's gone. And here's something for everybody. You stand on the top of the capstone at Pentre Ifan, which you mustn't do. But if you were to, and you mustn't, of course, then you can see Foel Dragon. Because that flat land, you saw the capstone pointing downhill, it's quite a bit lower Pentre Ifan than the field. So if you go up to the field and you stand on any of the big rocks there, you can see Pentre Ifan, which is the final point of the half double square that we looked at. So I will work on the farmer. The answer to your question is, as soon as I have some news, I will tell Hugh, and it will be on my website.
I think we've got the best question of the entire weekend just turned up here from Kate Masters. When using the wife measurement, are we talking about the British short wife or the long wife?
No, we're not. We're talking about the Royal Geographical wife.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad we've cleared
John
that
Neal. That's for John Neal.
You
go from the British wife, you multiply by 8, by 3/2, by 8/7, and you get that measurement. And she's here. Look, she doesn't want to appear. Come on. This is the British standard wife.
And the final question from Gwen, wonderful lecture. Why aren't we tapping into this intelligence and using these sites to improve future constructions and inventions?
Some of us are.
Oh, there you go. Okay, all right, brilliant. Okay, I think we're good. Thanks so much, Robin.